Hello and welcome to today's Tiger webinar. I'm Lydia Palmer from RIT's Division of Development and Alumni Relations, and I'm your moderator for today's webinar. We're happy to have you join us today, and we hope that you and our entire Tiger family are well. As we all continue to weather this new working environment, we want you to know that the RIT Office of Alumni Relations is available to help all RIT alumni with a variety of needs, including new content, learning opportunities, and networking and career assistance through the new normal of pandemic realities. We especially encourage you all to connect to the RIT Alumni Association social media channels, including Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, where you will find up-to-date communications and opportunities to connect to other Tiger alumni in your region and your industry. Those links are found in the chat box, and the chat box can be opened by clicking on the chat tab at the right of your webinar window. Many in our RIT family have asked how they can help our students and the university as we respond to the pandemic, and we are very grateful for those offers. There are two ways that you can help. First, our new graduates and current students are seeking positions for full-time careers and co-ops, respectively. Many of these positions were delayed or canceled entirely in the current climate. So if your company is hiring or you would consider adding a co-op post, please contact Chris Steeler in RIT's Career Services Office and allow her to post the position in our systems. In addition, there is now an unprecedented need for financial aid scholarships for current and incoming Tiger students. If you are able, please make a gift at the link in the chat box below to support scholarship programs. Thank you all so much. We want to invite all RIT alumni to attend a special town hall discussion next week, June 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern with President Dave Munson and Dr. Keith Jenkins from the Division of Diversity and Inclusion. Drs. Munson and Jenkins will be discussing RIT's response to the COVID-19 crisis and the current climate of protest over racism. They will share the administration's vision for RIT and preparations for our students' return to campus in the fall. Registration is required, and the link can be found in the chat box. We want to we want to ensure that everyone is ready and understands our presentation tools. If you are joining from a remote location and are currently signed into your company's VPN, we encourage you to close that channel during the webinar to increase the quality of your transmission. The webinar platform is completely secure. All attendees have joined in mute mode. However, your questions can be entered in the chat box at any time throughout the discussion. We will make every effort to address all your comments and questions throughout the webinar. You are joining the event using broadcast audio. If you wish to dial in by phone, dial-in information is provided in the chat box. Live captioning and ASL interpreting are being provided for this webinar, and you can find the links to access those in the chat box as well. This webinar will be recorded and made available complete with captions in approximately 1 week following today's event. All participants will receive an email with the link to the recording. If you have technical questions, please go ahead and type those into the chat box as well, and we will do our best to get you the appropriate answers. And now on to today's webinar. We are very pleased to welcome Chef de Cuisine in RIT's Student Alumni Union, Eric Merkovich. With oversight for Brick City Cafe and the Ritz, Eric is the first chef de cuisine for the SAU dining areas. He designs the menu for the facilities, produces the food, and supervises all cooks with the goal of keeping more than 1,800 students, faculty, and staff fed and happy each day. Eric has been a working food professional since 1993 when he started as a cook at a vegetarian cafe. That inspired him to attend culinary school where he studied baking and pastry. He worked as a pastry chef and a sous chef at 2 of Rochester's country clubs and then joined RIT, where one of his main priorities is to incorporate fresh foods into the meals for our students. Eric, we thank you so much for joining us today. We're all hungry, so let's get going with the cooking demo, and our audience is all yours.
All right, thanks, Lydia. So I'm obviously cooking from home today, not from RIT. Working from home is something a lot of us have gotten used to or had to deal with for the last few months. What I'm going to show you guys today is how to prepare a pretty classic Vietnamese sandwich called the Banh Mi. I'm going to do a tofu version of that. It can be served with pork or chicken or a variety of fillings. Banh Mi actually just refers to the bread. It's the Vietnamese name for the bread that the sandwich is made on, and also just to the sandwich itself. They share a name. The dish that we're going to make today is going to have kind of the classic ingredients: pickled vegetables, some spicy spread. I'm going to make a sriracha mayo, fresh cilantro, and we're going to do a marinated pressed tofu. So in order to get this done in the hour that we have together, I'm going to start with the tofu, because that's going to take a little while to press. Tofu comes two ways. Sometimes it's packaged aseptically, like in a sealed up container, but usually it's packed in water. Like most foods, tofu is mostly water. So the water kind of serves two functions. It helps keep it from drying out. And then it also provides kind of anaerobic environment, or so that it doesn't oxidize and spoil. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of some of that water. Just going to pour that off. And then we're going to press this to get more of the water out, so it'll take up some of the flavor we want to put in it. One interesting thing about the tofu that we use at RIT, I didn't know this until recently. I should have known a long time ago. Soy Boy is made in Rochester, New York, and has been since I think like the late 70s or something like that. So it's kind of cool to have a local product. So I'm going to press it between two plates. I'm going to just set another plate right on top of this tofu. And then you want a heavy object, like a can is ideal. About 2 pounds is what you want. I didn't have a can that was the right size. So I'm going to use this jar. That's kind of I would not advise using a jar, because as you can imagine, it might tip to one side or the other. I'm going to live dangerously today and press this with a glass jar. I'm going to put it somewhere where I keep an eye on it. And you want to let this press for like at least 10 to 15 minutes, more like half an hour is probably even better. But I'll show you how much water comes out of it after that period. So we're just going to set that aside while I'm working on the other stuff for the sandwich. Another classic topping for banh mi is pickled vegetables. It can be different depending on who the cook is. Daikon radish, carrot, cucumber, hot peppers, those are pretty classic ingredients. So that's what we're going to go with today. These are going to be pickled using a vinegar-based brine. Like a classic true pickle is a fermented product where you would put salt water or just salt over a vegetable and let it ferment for a couple weeks. We don't really have that much time now. This is like the shortcut, more modern method of making pickles. And this recipe for the brine is actually really versatile. You can use it for just regular cucumber pickles. You can do pickled carrots. I do all kind of pickled onions are great with this. If you were not taking it in sort of the Asian flavor direction, I would just omit the ginger from the recipe, leave the garlic in there, and you'll get a really nice multi-purpose brine. And you could also make it with any number of vinegars. I called for rice wine vinegar. You could use apple cider vinegar, red wine vinegar, white wine vinegar. And that balsamic would be the only vinegar I would say would not be a really good choice, because that's got so much sugar in it already. Your basic ratio for a pickle brine is going to be equal parts water and vinegar. So that was the rice wine vinegar that went in. And here's the water. And then just a way to remember it, for every cup of water, you're going to add a tablespoon of kosher salt and a tablespoon of sugar. The reason I specify kosher salt is not because there's anything special about the kosher salt as far as what it's doing. Kosher salt is coarse, and so if you're making a volume measure, there's less kosher salt per tablespoon than there is table salt. Right? So table salt is a finer crystal, so there's going to be less air and more salt. So if you were substituting table salt for the kosher salt, I would cut it maybe in half, or maybe 2/3. All right, now my sugar's going in. All right. And then I've got Make sure I stay on camera here. I've got 2 cloves of garlic. Just gonna trim off the root. Press that to get the skin off. Peel this guy. And I'm just gonna slice it up. You don't really even have to slice it. It's gonna release a little more of the flavor in there. And if you want to leave it in the sandwich, with the pickled vegetables, a smaller piece would be better. Or if you want to leave the whole clove, you could pull it out of the brine before you were to just put it on the sandwich. I'm just gonna peel this ginger. You could use a peeler, you could use a spoon. I'm just going quick here. Just gonna slice off this exterior skin with a knife. Also, I'm gonna slice this up. And that's going to go into the brine mixture. I'm going to put this on to boil. And while that's coming up to a simmer, we're going to prepare the vegetables. So as I said, I've got daikon radish, I've got carrot, cucumber, and jalapeno pepper. And the cut that we're going to use to get these all to a uniform size is called the Julienne. It's basically like a matchstick. It's a long, thin piece, and that's going to be nice to bite into in the sandwich. It's going to take up the flavor from the brine really quickly. The only downside is it's kind of a pain to do this cut. So it's a little bit of a higher level culinary skill. I'm going to show you 2 ways to do it. One is with a tool called the Mandolin, and one is just by hand. So for this daikon radish, I'm just going to cut it in half to get it down to a little bit more of a workable size. And then I'm going to peel it. All right. So for doing a Julienne cut by hand, I'm just going to first cut it into thin slices. You could go straight across like that, or you could go lengthwise. They both work. It really depends on the size of the vegetable. You're just really looking for like the thickness. I'd say no thicker than a 1/4 inch thick. And then to do a Julienne cut by hand, then I'm just going to cut it into little matchsticks like that. So a longer piece like this, same thing. Just want little thin pieces like that. Now I'm going to show you a different way to do that Julienne cut is with this tool called a mandolin. Not something that everybody has in their kitchen, but really common in like a classic professional kitchen. It's a really versatile device. It's simple, but you can do waffle cut on it. You can do slice. It slices, it dices, it does it all. So to get a Julienne cut with this mandolin, I've got a blade, a slicing blade, and then I've got a fine like grating blade that I'm just going to adjust the depth to on that I want. And then you're just going to run it along here. This is also a good, easy way to cut yourself in the kitchen. So you got to be careful with these, and you get the same result. It's a little bit faster. So we're going to do the same thing with the carrot. I'm going to peel it, and then I'm going to julienne it, and I'm going to do a little bit different with the cucumber. I'll show you a different method for that. But for the carrot, I'm just going to peel that. I'll go ahead and use the mandolin for the carrots. It's a little bit faster, but you would do the same thing if you were to cut it by hand. Just cut it into 10 slices and then cut each slice up into matchstick sizes. All right, got my carrot, got my daikon. Now, cucumber. I'm going to do this a little bit differently. Same first step, I'm going to peel it. All right. And now I'm going to cut the cucumber in half lengthwise. Try to get that where you can see it. I'm not used to working on camera. And then I'm going to cut it into quarters, again, lengthwise. So you want like a little triangle wedge-shaped piece. And then you're going to go in with your knife. Careful with your fingers. I'm going to take out the seeds. English cucumbers don't have much in the way of seeds in them at all to begin with, but you really don't want that in there because it's going to make for a softer pickle. We just want to keep these like more the crunchy bits. All right. And now for the cucumber, what I'm going to do, I'm going to even these up. You've got two things you could do here. You could cut it on a bias, sort of on an angle like that. I'm going to cut them in half and then just cut them on the length, just like this. Get my little thin strips. I don't know if it's loud enough to hear on the audio, but my water is coming to a simmer. So it's almost time to get the veggies in there. All right, that's enough for us. And then the jalapeno pepper. So this is the recipe calls for 1 jalapeno pepper. It's going to depend on the size of the pepper and how much heat you like. If you don't like, you could omit it entirely if you don't want any heat, or just use half of the pepper. I'm going to use the whole thing. My kids are home today. They're going to probably end up eating this for lunch. They like spicy things.
Now, Eric, you're not using gloves with that jalapeno pepper. Is that not necessary? Everybody tells me I got to wear gloves.
It's going with my theme of living dangerously today, I guess. I mean, yeah, if you're sensitive to heat, I know enough to know like not to touch my eyes before I wash my hands. Those oils can kind of linger on your hands for a little while. So if you have sensitive skin, or if you're concerned about that, you could wear gloves and remove them. Gloves are kind of hard to come by now, so maybe a lot of people don't even have those in their home, or maybe they do now. But I just make sure I wash my hands before I were to touch my face or anything. But that's a good point, especially the seeds. So
Yeah.
Boiling right now. I'm just going to put these veggies in. And I'm just going to let them sit in the hot pan just for maybe 30, 40 seconds. And then I'm going to dump them into a shallow pan because I want to accelerate the cooling process. You could make these a week ahead, a day ahead. They keep very well, but we're going to try to get this done quickly today. And this is a tool, I don't know if a lot of home cooks use these. I can't recommend this enough. It's like a baker's dough knife or a bench scraper. And you can see I use it all the time to keep my cutting board tidy. I can pick things up with it. You can portion things with it, separate with it. It's really a great tool. All right, I'm going to wash my hands now so I don't go on and burn myself with that. All right. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take that off the heat. And I'm just going to pour it into this shallow heat-proof glass pan. I'm just going to let it sit until we're ready to build the sandwich. And this, if you were going to store this for an extended period, you obviously want to cool it completely and then put it in a sealed container in your fridge. And it'll keep in the fridge for really months, but it usually doesn't last very long in my house. So the pickles in any form are pretty popular here. So you can see they got really nice color. They're going to have nice texture. Ooh, I can feel that vinegar and the jalapeno from that. So I'm going to set that aside, let that cool down. So those are all set. They just need to cool off. So the next thing is going to be the tofu. It's been sitting for about 15 minutes, maybe a little less, but it's going to have to do for today. So I'll bring this back here, take this jar off. Thankfully, nothing crashed. And then let's hold this up. You can see the liquid, a good amount of liquid. I'd say, gosh, 3 tablespoons, maybe even a quarter cup of liquid came off of here. It's going to pour it off. And then I'm going to use a piece of paper towel just to pat it dry. And this is going to firm up the tofu, make it less likely to crumble, and it's also just going to allow it to soak up any flavors that you want to put in there. We do a marinated tofu at Brick City Cafe that's very popular, and we press usually about 20 pounds at a time overnight, and then you get a lot of moisture out of it, and then you come back in the morning, marinate it, let it marinate overnight, and then cook it the 3rd day. So it's like a 3-day process. This we're accelerating a little bit. And I also just thought I would keep the marinade simple. I'm just using a little soy sauce. We have so many other flavors in this banh mi. Just the soy should be enough to give it a little pop. All right, I'm going to slice this nice thin slices. I think I said about 1/3 of an inch. If it's too thin, it's going to crumble. Too thick, it won't take up the flavor. And it won't get as crispy on the griddle. Speaking of the griddle, let me turn my griddle on here. And you can do that in a cast iron skillet, fry pan. I just have a little removable griddle on my gas range. So anything like that will work. All right, I'm going to spread this out on the plate. You could use a plate, Pyrex pan, just something that's going to have a little depth to capture this the liquid. All right, just going to marinate this in a little. I'm just using a gluten-free tamari soy sauce. Tamari soy sauce is generally made with just soybeans and not with wheat, whereas like a traditional or shoyu tofu or soy sauce is made with soy and wheat, so it's not gluten-free. This is gluten-free. We use this just because it's an easy way to make a dish that would otherwise be gluten-free to keep it gluten-free. It's one of those sneaky ways that wheat can get in food. And then also on amounts, kind of like the jalapeno, I call it for a 1/4 cup, but you could adjust that based on how much saltiness you like, and also how salty your soy sauce is. There's low sodium soy sauces out there. This one is actually quite strong, so it's actually good that we're not going to be marinating it quite as long. And if you're only doing a quick marinade, it won't matter if it's a real salty soy sauce, but if it's a really salty soy and you leave it in there overnight, you might end up with a product that is more salt than you would like. All right, just going to turn that over. I'm going to set that aside. Let that marinate while the griddle's heating up. Wash my knife and hands again. Constant washing of hands is not something new to anyone who works in a kitchen, as much as it might be a little bit different for regular folks in recent months.
And Eric, with the tofu, do you have the same concerns about bacteria and keeping things clean as you would with a meat product?
Not necessarily. Like in professional kitchen, I mean, the things you think about are like cross-contamination and then cross-contact. So it would have a cross-contamination would be very rare with tofu. I mean, it'd have to be something that happened in the factory, which would be super unusual. It is a low acid, high protein food, so it has the potential to carry a foodborne illness. Like that's kind of the hallmarks that you look for of a food that could be dangerous. Something that's moist and that has protein and that it's like has a neutral pH. But tofu doesn't inherently carry bacteria the way like an animal would. So like a lot of like E. coli, salmonella, those are things that come from the animal, in the field, and then they bring that into the factory, and then it gets spread around. And they would do a very good job in this country with preventing that from happening, but it can happen. the tofu is made from soy milk. They boil the soy milk and then curdle it, kind of like the way you would cheese, then strain it and press it. So it's a lot less likely to be contaminated, but it's certainly possible. And as far as like rules for cooking, tofu would fall under like a vegetable category. The state mandate would be if you're cooking it to serve it hot or to cook it and then cool it, it would have to reach an internal temperature of 140 Fahrenheit, versus 165 for chicken, 158 for ground beef. So it's generally considered less risky, but I wouldn't keep it out on my shelf for a long time. Something got in there, it could certainly grow. Okay. So, all right, where was I? Okay, so we got the tofu marinated. Now I'm going to talk about the bread. So Vietnamese food has a lot of influence of French cuisine. Obviously, Vietnam had a colonial history with France, and some of the things that they brought with them was the cuisine, and the Vietnamese people really adapted it, some of the dishes, and made them their own. I think of like Vietnamese coffee, pho, the classic soup is just a variation on a classic French dish. I think the Vietnamese version is way better personally. And so banh mi was another dish like that. So we think about a classic French baguette made into a sandwich. That's basically what banh mi is. So I'm just going to grab these rolls here. So like a baguette from like Wegmans Bakery or one of the bakeries in town would be a really good starting point for this. I was on campus yesterday and I baked off a few sub rolls that we had. So that's what I'm using. I'm just going to cut these in half in order to make sandwiches out of them. I'm not going to cut it all the way through. I'm just going to leave it a little bit together, just like that. And then I'm going to toast these in the oven just to kind of freshen them up and crisp them up just a little bit. All right. And so I preheated my oven to 350. If you just had one roll you're going to make for one person, you could throw it in the toaster, throw it in the toaster oven. You could do it on a griddle, on a flat top. You just want to just kind of crisp up the bread a little bit and freshen it up. Toasting bread, like day old bread, everybody like knows that it freshens it up, but it alters the bread. It makes bread more like fresh baked bread by drawing the moisture that's kind of gone to the surface of the bread and made the crust soggy. That crisps up, and then the moisture actually kind of gets in the form of steam brought back into the bread itself. And so day old bread is a lot better if you toast it. So I'm going to toast this up. I'm going to set a timer. And while that is toasting, I think we're going to start on the tofu. So this tofu has been marinating for a few minutes. You can see it's picked up definitely some color from the soy sauce. And we're going to put it on the flat top and sear it on both sides. So on the recipe, I called for a neutral oil to sear it in. You could use canola oil. You could use peanut oil. I'm using grapeseed oil. You don't want to use an extra olive oil, something that a lot of the flavor to the party that you don't necessarily want. So I'm going to use.
Eric, just one quick question. Can you let us know again what's the timer for the bread? How long is the bread in there?
I put it on for 3 minutes. It's going to depend on your oven and what temperature you have it on. I just thought since my mind is occupied with other things, I would set a timer for it. So you're warming it up, getting it a little crispy, nothing major. All right, so I'm going to put this oil on the flat top here. And I don't even need to use the full 2 tablespoons. If you were using like a cast iron skillet or something that might stick a little more, you probably want to use that full amount of oil. This has a little non-stick coating on it, so I'm not worried about it sticking. I'm sure you're going to hear this sizzle. So as the moisture from that marinade is coming out of that, it's gonna sizzle and pop a little bit. It's gonna die down once it's on there for about 30 seconds. You'll hear it get a little quieter. I'm gonna let it cook probably about 2 minutes on each side, and then I'm gonna put it on a plate that's got a little bit of paper towel on it just to absorb any extra oil or any extra moisture that would be on the tofu, and cool it down a little bit before we make our sandwich. While that is cooking, I'm going to go ahead and make the sriracha mayo. So I'm just using regular mayo. That's what I had in my fridge. If you're doing meat in the sandwich, like roasted pork or grilled chicken, obviously you wouldn't really be concerned about animal products. Because I am making a tofu sandwich, I just want to mention that a vegan could use vegan mayo. You can find those in Wegmans, and all the grocery stores pretty much have vegan mayo. Oh, there's my timer. Yeah, it's good. So obviously regular mayo has egg in it. So this has egg. So without this, our sandwich, I believe, would be totally plant-based. So if you want to make a totally plant-based sandwich, just use a vegan mayo. It works the same way with the sriracha. It's a great product. Actually, you can make vegan mayo on your own with soy milk and mustard powder and neutral oil. I guess that's a recipe for another webinar, but it's actually really, really easy to make. So
I'm on the calendar right now.
Right, all right. vegan mayo. So I'm just going to add a tablespoon of sriracha. And again, just like the soy sauce and jalapeno, use your own discretion. If just a squirt is fine. If you really like it spicy, do a quarter cup. But about a tablespoon per half cup. That's what we use at Ritz and Brick City when we're making like sriracha mayo for specials. You want to be able to really taste that sriracha. So I'm just going to stir that in there. See, it's got that nice pink color from the sriracha. And we're going to spread that on both sides of the sandwich before we build them. Set that aside. And I'm going to take a look here. Actually, I'm going to remove this. It's a little hot. I know it's a little hard to see from there, but I wanted to put the camera in a spot where I wouldn't have to fuss with it while I was cooking. So I'm going to flip these over, and I'll put them back on camera when I'm done with them so you can see what they look like. So I'm gonna let them cook for about 2 more minutes on this side, get a little golden brown and crispy. And so one thing, I am cooking in my home today. I'm cooking for myself and my family, so I'm not wearing gloves. If this was in a professional kitchen, obviously New York State mandates that you wear gloves when you're handling ready-to-eat foods. But the reason I don't have gloves on today is I don't normally wear gloves when I'm cooking for my family at home. It sometimes feels a little weird to be, especially in front of other people, to be putting together a sandwich without gloves on. It's such a force of habit. But it's also nice. I appreciate cooking at home without having to, wash my hands and put gloves on 10 times, way more than 10 times a day, lots of times a day. All right, so the tofu's searing, the mayo's made, the vegetables are pickling. bread's toasted. We're getting pretty close with all the ingredients on this. I just want to talk about some other toppings real quick for this. So in the recipe, I think I specified sprigs of fresh cilantro, and that's very classic, the classic addition to it. They usually use a lot of fresh cilantro, bring that cilantro flavor, but you could also use mint. You could use basil, either Thai basil or Italian basil, a combination of all three. Green onion, I've got a little green onion that I sliced up today. My family's big fans of onion, and I've got some, this actually lettuce from my garden, but any kind of field mix or leaf lettuce, shredded lettuce. You could do tomatoes, fresh cucumbers, really any vegetable that you would normally put on a sandwich, you could put on there. But that's just the mix that I have today. For the recipe, I sort of stuck with just the classics. I didn't want to make the ingredient list too long, and it'll be delicious with those ingredients. But if you want to think outside the box and add some more stuff, it certainly will make it only more delicious. All right, I'm gonna check this tofu. Yeah, it's getting there. Okay, so I've got a plate with a paper towel. If you happen to have like a glazing rack or like a little screen, you could use a screen. You don't have to use a paper towel. That would be another way just to get any excess oil and moisture away from it, but a paper towel works great. All right, so that's the seared tofu. It's a little, when it comes off of the flat top, it's still a little bit soft. As it cools a little bit, it's going to get a little bit more firm and easier to work with. But it's almost hard to get it too crispy. Like you could cook it even for longer if you want to get a nice like crunchy exterior on it. And if you wanted to jazz up the marinade, other things you could add to that would be like a little sesame oil, a little like garlic chili paste. You could add ginger and garlic to the marinade. I just stuck with the soy to try to keep it simple, what people would have in their houses, but you can again take it and run with it and really get a lot of interesting flavors. And that tofu is a great vehicle for flavors, especially if you press the liquid out of it. It'll just suck those flavors right up. All right, so take a look at the pickled vegetables. They're still pretty warm, but they will have, at this point, will have taken up a lot of the flavor from the brine. It won't hurt to leave it in there longer. You can leave it in there, overnight for days. It'll get better. The acidity in the excuse me.
Sorry, I got a brief kick out there from the system, but go. Please go ahead.
No worries. So the acidity from the vinegar helps keep the vegetables crisp. Like that's what makes the vegetables get that firm texture when they're a pickle. If you're making pickles from scratch, like a fermented pickle, you get that acidity from lactic acid bacteria that forms naturally in vegetables, which is totally safe. It's a beneficial bacteria, but we're reproducing that just by adding the acetic acid in the form of vinegar. But it's the chemical reaction or chemical expression is the same. It's that acidity is going to keep the vegetable firm. But I do have some that I made this morning. I let them cool down and then I strain them. I'm just going to show you what those look like. So if you're going to use it on the sandwich, rather than picking it right out of the brine, my recommendation would be to strain it. You could save the brine if you're going to want to put the vegetables that you have left over back in, but you want to sort of get it a little bit like dried out so it's not going to sog out your bread too much, and it'll make for a better sandwich. So I've got these I'm going to work with, and I'm going to get ready to start building the sandwich. All right, clear up the board here. All right, so I got my roll that's toasted. I split it open, not completely. I'm going to spread both sides. A little bit of the sriracha mayo. Next is going to my tofu. I'm going to do some pickled vegetables. Definitely get some jalapeno in there. This is when you sort of get to make it your own. You're making everybody, like you could do this as a buffet where you would just have everything prepped, have everything out on a tray, have your bread all toasted and cut up, and everybody could build their own. And I guess that way you could also have an option of grilled chicken for some people, or like grilled pork loin that's sliced up, grilled beef like flank steak, and everybody could sort of make their own sandwich. But you got to get lots of the pickled veg in there. The Daikon radish is just a great flavor. That's the one thing I would not omit from the recipe. And usually you can find daikon just in the produce section of most grocery stores now. It's increasingly just easy to find. All right, cilantro. I'll put that up here. And if you have an aversion to cilantro, obviously substitute. And if, I totally believe people when they say they don't like cilantro. It's actually a genetic characteristic. Certain people perceive cilantro to taste like soap in their mouth. And so I know people who just absolutely hate cilantro. I love cilantro, but when people say they don't like it, they're not just being picky. It's an actual like way that you taste. All right, I'm gonna put some of this leaf lettuce on here. This is optional, but nice. And then a little green onion. Put that on the cilantro side. All right, now the challenge is going to be getting this closed and getting it sliced. I'm going to press it down. That's where your serrated knife is very handy. And right on the plate. And that's that. That's the banh mi sandwich with tofu. So it's deceivingly simple looking, but you can see a lot of steps go into making it. Obviously, anytime you're pickling your own vegetables, pressing and marinating your own tofu, it's a little bit more of a labor of love, but I think well worth it. And except the mayo, it's a totally plant-based dish. So,
hey, Eric, that's fantastic. Thanks so much. We really appreciate you sharing this recipe and also all the fantastic techniques and information that you provided along with it. I think there are things that we'll take into other cooking ventures with the audience. And your kids eat well, I can see.
Yeah, they appreciate it more, I think, now that they're not at home every day to eat. They're like, oh, we actually really like the food you cooked, because when they were little, they would complain about it a lot. But it's two of my favorite things to do, cooking and talking about cooking. So this has been fun. I appreciate you guys asking me to be here and share this with you. And once we're back open again at Brick City Cafe and Ritz, hopefully everyone will come and see us and eat on campus.
Absolutely. This has been great. Thank you so much. Well, if anyone has some additional questions, you can email them to ritalum@rit.edu, and we'll direct your questions to Eric. As we said, everyone will receive an email from us in about a week with a link to today's webinar recording. And we did get a request for a recipe, if you've got one with the pork, if there's something that you want to share with them about how you would actually do that with the pork as opposed to the tofu. So we'll share that along at that time as well. Everyone can see a full listing of upcoming virtual events like today's webinar at rit.edu/alumni/tigers-staying-home. We have several virtual events each week, and we want to include you all in as many as possible. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. You can exit the webinar by just closing your browser window, and do let us know what you thought through a brief survey that you will all receive via email. Thanks so much. Everyone enjoy what I hope is your lunch that you've been preparing along. Have a terrific weekend and stay safe.
All right. Thank you, guys.